Hello everybody, and welcome to what is my first video lecture on project work. I chose this subject for my first video lecture because I think it's very, very important indeed. In the job that I do, which involves travelling around and talking to teachers all over the world, I try very hard to look at techniques which are successful, techniques which work, and try and learn more about them. One of the areas that I think is very, very important for the modern teacher to exploit is this idea of project work. And what I hope to do in this video lecture is talk a little bit about why project work is important and why it is that we feel teachers should be spending time encouraging their students to do it. And of course, what benefits we hope you will gain from project work, both in terms of general student behaviour and of course, more importantly, in terms of language that students will acquire. As we go through, I'll be making certain references to material, I'll also be showing you some quotations, etc., which I hope you'll find useful. Now, whenever we talk about a subject, it's very important to define our terms. The first thing I would like to do, therefore, is talk a little bit more about what project work actually is, because terminology can mean many different things to many different people. So the first thing I'd like to do is share a quotation with you based on the definition of what project work would be. Now, the most important part of that quotation is the fact that we have to remember that project work is very much about the learner. That it is the moment at which the teacher takes a back seat and says to the learners, okay guys, you go ahead and you do some work on this by yourselves. And what that means is ultimately the content and the style in which our learners will present the information is very much decided by them. And that is one of the most important teaching points of the whole exercise. I'd like to give you another quotation now, so have a look at this one. What this quotation highlights is one of the most important parts of project work, in that it allows students to synthesize aspects of the whole school curriculum. In other words, for example, if I have a student in my classroom who's not terribly good, for example, at English, okay? They don't seem to enjoy the subject very much at all. If I do project work, it may be that my student is much better at something like art, or computers, or science. Maybe they are terribly good at music, for example. What project work will allow me to do is it will allow my learner to demonstrate that they have other interests and other abilities in the language classroom. And that can be very motivating for learners who don't respond well to more traditional methods of teaching, for example, reading comprehension, listening exercises, learning hours of endless verbs, etc. So that's one very important area. One of the other elements, of course, of that quotation was the idea of teaching my learners communication skills. And I think this is very important for the modern teacher. Many of our learners will be moving into an environment where they have to use their English in a truly communicative fashion, whether that be socially or in the world, for example, of business. And what project work will allow me to do is to teach my learners to use English in a way that's coherent, organized, logical, possibly persuasive kind of way, and that's great for learners who are studying business. So project work allows me to draw on the totality of my learners' learning experience and helps them prepare themselves to use language in a much broader spectrum of situations than otherwise might be possible using more traditional methods. So to summarize, before we move into specific examples and also into the technicalities of arranging project work, let's very quickly recap on what I've said so far about why project work is important. I've said that project work will enable my learner to draw on a whole range of experiences and apply those to the world of English and more importantly to communicating in English. It will allow my learner to develop skills which are to do with cooperative learning, working with other people and being aware of other people as the recipients of my communication. And of course it's going to help my learner become much more independent in their learning and encourage them to find things out for themselves, to use resources like, for example, the internet obviously, but also maybe dictionaries and maybe even talking to other people and learning from them. So before we move any further, we've established that project work covers a massive spectrum of things that learners need to learn to do in a very positive and hopefully motivating fashion. Now, let's have a think a little bit about the practicalities. Quite often when I talk to teachers about whether they do project work or not, one of the issues that bothers them is this idea of time, understandably. Teachers have a lot to do in the classroom, they have a lot of things they have to get through, and usually not enough time to do so. So they are concerned that if they start another thing in the class, for example project work, that they will find themselves even shorter of time than they have been so far. Now obviously there is an element of time involved in project work, but I would first of all like to point out that it's probably a lot less than teachers fear that it is. And secondly, of course, we always have to balance out the question of input as opposed to output. So for example, yes, maybe it takes a little bit longer to set up project work in the classroom, but quite possibly the output that I get from that is much larger and possibly more effective than maybe some other style of teaching. So whenever we're thinking of something new, we have to weigh up, to a certain extent, we have to balance the time we spend on it with the result that we get. And for many of our learners, project work can be a highly productive way of getting them to learn English. So, down to the practicalities. Now, what usually should happen is that the project work will develop organically from the work we're normally doing in the classroom anyway. If you remember, most things we do these days tend to be theme-based. So, for example, you'll have a module in a book which is possibly about food, or maybe about technology, or hobbies, or work, or whatever. What should happen, therefore, is that throughout the unit, our learners will be learning the vocabulary, let's say, of technology. They'll be learning grammar, maybe that's related to the subject area. They'll be doing some reading comprehension about technology, compositions maybe about technology. And then at the end of that block of work, we can hopefully ask our learners to do some kind of project work on technology. And what that will do, of course, is allow them to consolidate everything they've already been learning, the language, the grammar, all of that stuff, into a discrete piece of work that will also allow them to demonstrate the skills that I mentioned in my introduction. So in terms of timing, it should require maybe no more than 5 to 10 minutes of instructing my learners to do the project work, and a short time possibly brainstorming ideas for the project work that they're going to do. Okay, so that's as regards timing. Now, usually we would suggest that project work is done in groups. One of the reasons for this is to encourage learners to work cooperatively. It also allows learners to bring different skills to bear and possibly learn from each other in the kind of project environment. So learners should be grouped. Now, I'm hopefully going to be doing another video lecture on cooperative learning, and you may, if you're interested in project work, want to have a look at that. Because certainly here, certain ideas that come to us from cooperative learning will be very useful. Project work is a cooperative learning technique in many ways. Our learners will therefore have to be arranged into groups. Now, it's normally nice if we can allow learners to work with their friends. This means they hopefully find it more motivating, and certainly that they should find it easier to produce work. However, it's not always a good idea to allow our learners to decide these things 100% for themselves. For example, if two weaker students happen to be friends, it may not be the best idea in the world to allow these two students to work together. Maybe you want to add someone to that group who is slightly more experienced and who is likely to produce better work. We want project work to be an experience which encourages learners, not which reinforces negative feelings about their own learning processes. As I said, if you are interested in cooperative learning, hopefully we'll be putting together another video lecture on that, and you'll find information there regarding the setting up of groups in a little more detail, which we're not going to look at now. In terms of the timetable for project work, it's very important that we give our learners specific deadlines and that we stick to them. For example, and this is only as an example, it doesn't have to be taken as 100%. Maybe I say to my learners today, let's say it's Tuesday, maybe I say to my learners, okay, next Tuesday we're going to bring in our projects and we're going to have a look at them. Now, a very important part of that process is establishing that on Friday I'm going to ask my learners to bring in, or at least show me, what they have done so far. At the end of Friday's lesson, for example, the last 5 minutes, I'm going to ask my learners to show me what they've got. Why is that important? Well, very simply, A, because if they haven't got anything, they still have the weekend or time before Tuesday to put something together. What I don't want is on Tuesday my learners coming in and telling me they haven't prepared anything, because on Tuesday it's just too late and the whole thing is just going to go on and on and on. So on Friday I ask my learners what they've got, what they've come up with. If they haven't, why not? What are they planning on doing? So that we have something at least for Tuesday. And also, of course, there may be learners who are stuck for ideas, who can't agree with each other about exactly what they want to do, and therefore will require my help or my guidance as teacher in getting the project work moving forward. It may be that there are learners who are really very much, ahead of the game, who are very happy with what they're doing and are just fine. But this all needs to be known well in advance of the lesson in which the project work is due to be handed in. Certainly at the early stages of teaching my learners project work, if they show that they are to be trusted, if they show that they are capable of meeting deadlines, then fair enough, you can ease back from that possibly a little later on. Once that is done, project work day will come, let's say, in my case, Tuesday. Now, some learners will do projects in different formats. Some projects will be kind of more art-based, some may take the form of presentations or little speeches, or even these days PowerPoint presentations, why not? We have to be a little bit careful of our timing. Usually for some kind of oral presentation, 3 minutes maximum is going to be more than enough. I say 3 minutes based on the fact that if you have a class of even 30 students, which is a large class, you have maybe groups of 3, that's 10 groups of 3. If each presentation is 3 minutes long, that's still only 30 minutes, which is a manageable amount of time for the classroom. So please, when you're setting up project work, clear instructions to begin with, certainly a clear set of deadlines, and control the day the project work is fed back to you so that it doesn't get out of hand and, to be honest, doesn't get a little bit boring. Okay, so we've got our timetable for project work sorted out. Now it's time to think just a little bit about the types of project work our learners may be asked to bring into the classroom. Traditionally, a lot of project work tended to be what we call poster work. That is, our learners in the past would go to magazines and things like that and cut out pictures, although of course increasingly these days they'll just download them from the internet, having Googled them. That they take these things, they would cut them out, stick them onto a larger piece of paper with some writing, some ideas on that, and this would be the project. And you know what, that's just fine. I would suggest, though, that these days we could be a little more adventurous. Many of our schools, for example, have computer facilities. It is not beyond the realms of possibility that there is at least one laptop available and the school owns a projector. These days, most schools have that very simple equipment. So I think it would be important to allow our learners, for example, to bring in, if they wish, something like a PowerPoint presentation. The great thing about PowerPoint, of course, is it allows learners, A, to demonstrate computer skills, which are very relevant for the modern world, but it also allows learners to draw in a number of different multimedia resources. So for example, they could bring in, on the PowerPoint presentation, they could have music, video extracts, of course, bullet points, etc. Any number of different combinations there, showing off their computer skills, but very importantly, we have to insist on language skills as well, so that a PowerPoint presentation, no matter how much multimedia it has, will also have some speaking or written element to it, and of course that in English. But do allow, as much as possible, your students to experiment with the use of computers in project work, because this is very much a world they understand. Something else you may want to look at in terms of project presentation is maybe a short piece of drama, asking learners maybe to do some kind of sketch or some kind of role-play situation, some kind of dramatized version of whatever it is they're talking about. And in a few minutes towards the end of this lecture, we'll be looking at some examples of projects that could possibly be effectively dramatized. So also, don't forget, you could just have a simple talk. Asking learners to talk on a subject for a couple of minutes as well is not a bad thing. The point to emphasize here is that project work should be the result of my learners' imagination. It should be the result of my learners' preferences. It should not be something that's necessarily decided by me. Please remember, project work is about the student. What I'd like to do now is take a project work section from one of our series, Access, and have a look and just see how we might actually realize that as a project in the class. Have a look at this project work rubric. Okay, so that particular project about shipwrecks, famous shipwrecks, and of course one of the most famous shipwrecks, the Titanic. Now, it would be wonderful if we could spend our English lesson just watching the whole Titanic movie, but that was kind of long and would require most of a week, so we're not going to do that. But it is an interesting project to think about in terms of the different ways we could actually bring that project to life. In the past, I brainstormed this particular one with teachers, and what I'd like to discuss with you are just basically some of the ideas that they came up with. Now, in the more traditional version, the kind of poster-based version, we could certainly have a poster using images of, for example, the Titanic there. Maybe it could be some kind of advert for the Titanic, you know, using old pictures of the Titanic, showing some of the features the Titanic has, the size, the luxury of the Titanic. Maybe this advertising could contain, and you can find this information on the internet by the way, the menus from the Titanic, the kind of services the Titanic provided, all this kind of thing. So we could have some kind of brochure regarding the Titanic that our learners could put together. Now, if you want to take that into the technological age, we could pretend, for example, if the Titanic were around at the time of computers, maybe the Titanic would have a website. Why not have a Titanic cruise website? In fact, there are many websites dedicated to cruises and holidays. So maybe our learners who are a little bit more computer savvy could put together a Titanic website, again, with images that they've collected from the internet, maybe some written information, of course, about the Titanic, and they could either demonstrate this in the classroom, or we could ask students to log on and see it, depending on the kind of facilities you've had available. One of my favourite suggestions, I'll be honest with you, was the teacher who suggested that they could build a model of the Titanic and actually demonstrate the sinking of the Titanic using models of a ship and an iceberg, and I think they mentioned a fish tank as well. A wonderful idea. Have a student talk through the whole night of the disaster, very much as happened in the movie with the animation in the first part. One of the my favourite suggestions that came up when talking about this project on the Titanic was to dramatise the Titanic, not in quite the same way that the movie did, but again to imagine the Titanic disaster in terms of our own society, and maybe look at how CNN or some news agency would cover the sinking of the Titanic in dramatic format. So, for example, you would have some kind of correspondent on the Carpathian, if I remember correctly, which is the name of the ship that came to rescue the survivors, interviewing the survivors on camera right there and then. So you could have news, you know, almost from the iceberg. You'd also have some kind of shipwreck expert in the studio. Whenever there are these disasters around the world, news agencies tend to find experts to talk about them. So you could have some kind of expert giving opinions on shipwrecks and the sinking of ships in the studio with the anchor. Maybe you'd have some kind of representative from the shipping company commenting or possibly not commenting on the disaster. And of course interviews with relatives, as they always do, anxiously waiting in New York or Liverpool to hear news from their loved ones who are either working on the Titanic or travelling on it. So you could actually have quite an interesting, dramatized event, all based on the events of the Titanic, bringing in possibly multimedia and certainly bringing in a number of students in that sense. So what I'm trying to establish here is that when we look at projects, if we allow our imaginations just a little bit of freedom, there are many, many ways that we can cover one particular topic. As another kind of project, have a look at this one, again from Access. This particular project asks our learners to put together some kind of class magazine. Now, what you can do here is possibly be a little flexible. Certainly, it could take a much longer term view as a project. For example, we could divide our class up into different editorial teams according to the students' interests. So maybe some of our students could be the sports editors. Maybe some of our students could be the kind of Hollywood gossip editors. Maybe we could have some of our students looking at school issues or possibly local issues or environmental issues. You get the general idea. And in their small editorial groups over the year, they put together ideas that are of interest to them in English. And towards the end of the year, we start to edit all of these ideas into some kind of class magazine. Now that could be real kind of printed magazine, or that could be some kind of online production. That would be entirely up to you. But this kind of project, if you can't do it in one go, over a short range of time, certainly you could look at it as a much longer project, and that would be kind of nice each year, each class producing its own class magazine, of which you keep a record, or the school keeps a record, to show to future students coming into the English classroom. Kind of nice idea. Another one from Access that I wanted to show you was this one regarding a quiz. Again, this can be adapted if you don't have time to do it in quite the way it suggests in the book. Maybe at the end of the year you could have a kind of Trivial Pursuits quiz written by your students. Again, you can divide students into groups depending on their interest, on their abilities. Some can write the history questions, some can write the geography, natural history, so on, sport, entertainment, all those other things. And these questions can then all be mixed up, and maybe we could have an end-of-term quiz in teams with the teacher as the quiz master and some kind of prize, I don't know, for the students at the end of the year. So whenever you see project work in material, please do have a think about ways, if it doesn't fit your classroom or your immediate possibilities, how you could possibly adopt it to fit in more easily with what you're doing. To finish off with, I'd like to show you a couple of pictures that I took myself from a classroom in the Czech Republic, from what happens to be, I think now, my most favourite classroom in the world. Have a quick look at these two pictures. What I would like to say to you in both cases is that the particular classroom these were taken in was the tidiest classroom I have ever seen. Everything in the classroom was stored away where it should be. Students' boxes and craft work boxes were all labelled with their names. There were separate drawers for paper and scissors and what have you. So project work isn't about making a mess. What was wonderful in that classroom with the project they did on the planets that you saw on the window, and the projects that they did on the sea, which was the last picture I showed you there was very much the sense that this classroom belonged to the students who studied in it. That this was a place they came to, it was a place in which they learned, and very much a place in which they enjoyed the process of learning. So I would like to ask you, if you haven't done project work or you haven't done it for a while, to commit, if you can, to maybe just doing one project this term and see where that takes you. Worst case scenario, you never do it again. Best case scenario, you discover a teaching process that has a huge amount to offer you and that you yourself might actually enjoy. Enjoy your teaching, and thank you very much for listening.